If you listen to Yeonmi Park's interview on the Joe Rogan Experience or have read anything about the lives of everyday North Korean people, it is clear that hunger is the defining experience of the majority of North Koreans that are alive today. This experience came to a crescendo during the North Korean Famine. The story of the famine is one of needless suffering and death. And over 20 years later, this famine still echoes into the everyday lives of North Koreans around the world. Crossing Borders has close relationships with many refugees in China and South Korea. As we have listened to thousands of testimonies, we have come to understand the famine's indelible mark on the North Korean psyche. In this series, we will examine the famine's causes, what happened during the North Korean famine, and its devastating effects. Hi, my name is Dan Chung, Executive Director and co-founder of Crossing Borders. I have spent countless hours listening to the stories of North Koreans firsthand, and I have also covered North Korea as a journalist, and it is my privilege to share this information with you today. In this video, we will examine 5 primary factors that caused the North Korean famine. First, let's talk about North Korea's Juche, or self-reliance philosophy. The founding principle of North Korea is what is at the heart of North Korea's central problem in the 90's. Juche is the law and the Bible in North Korea. In fact, the capital city Pyongyang is oriented around their iconic Juche Tower. The North Korean Constitution states that the North Korean government, quote, shall make the Juche ideology of the Workers' Party the guiding principle for all its actions. Juche is a collection of philosophies written by North Korea's founder, Kim Il-sung. It is centered around the notion that North Korea should be a largely self-sufficient state. Much of North Korea's history is marked by efforts to become self-sufficient, especially for food production. These plans never worked out, and all of the failed attempts compounded when the famine arrived. The reality of a famine conflicted with their core ideology of self-sufficiency. It was difficult for North Korea to seek help and to even report the truth to the necessary people because of this dissonance. While all the contributing factors shared in this video were present before the 90's, when the USSR collapsed, it poured gasoline on North Korea's problems and essentially kick-started the famine. The USSR was North Korea's safety net. They bought North Korea's low-quality exports when no one else would. In 1988, the Soviet Union represented about 60% of North Korea's trade activity. Essentially, they were North Korea's lifeline. All of this changed with tragic results when the USSR dissolved in 1991. When the Soviet Union collapsed, North Korea's largest trade relationship dissolved with it, and North Korea's economy was not far down the domino chain. In the decades leading up to the famine, North Korea experienced rapid growth in their farm production due to the use of modern chemical fertilizers. The government believed so deeply in the effectiveness of these chemicals that they used more and more as years went on. Andrew Natsios, in his book The Great North Korean Famine, wrote, "International agronomists with a wide knowledge of the farming system say they have never seen such excessive use of chemical fertilizer anywhere else in the world." The North Korean government fertilized their own agricultural production into a wasteland of chemicals. Some agronomists said that during the boom years, North Koreans were planting their crops in more chemicals than soil. A series of natural disasters ruined the already struggling and mismanaged land. This hampered the North Korean government's ability to adequately sustain its people. The production of food dropped to critical levels when these disasters hit. North Korea was struck by a cold front, pest control issues, and crop damage. A series of floods in 1995 devastated over 15% of North Korea's farmable, fertile land. Grain production dropped approximately 30% as a result of flooding in 95. But a second wave of floods in the next year struck the breadbasket regions of North Korea's arable land, regions that produced over 60% of the nation's food supply. Such disasters resulted in the loss of 300,000 metric tons of grain. The North Korean government, however, initially refused outside aid, even as hundreds of thousands of its people starved. But as the famine dragged on, they did end up accepting aid. In September of 1995, North Korea's diplomatic representatives made a stunning appeal to the World Food Program for help. This appeal was unknown to the isolated people of North Korea. The plea for assistance was startling to international neighbors because, much like today, the DPRK of the 90's boasted of its military and economic prowess. A call for help was a shock to the ears of the world leaders. It was unheard of, and most importantly, it was a sign that North Korea was in dire straits. It became quickly apparent that disaster was brewing. Inspectors were allowed into North Korea to examine the damage 2 years after the country made their initial plea for help. North Korea reportedly told outside organizations that they were not allowed into the country or that it wasn't a good time. Andrew Natsios was a part of this group of inspectors. He reported receiving conflicting information on his trip. He was told that the famine was focused in urban areas like Pyongyang, not in the outer regions of the north. He wrote, "The expatriate NGO and UN staff members whom I met at the airport displayed a level of cynicism, anger, and frustration I had never seen in any other emergency anywhere in the world. Many argued that there was no emergency, that no one was dying, and that the international community should not be there." Let's think about this for a moment. They cried out for help, then they waited 2 years to allow inspectors to come in, and then they didn't show the inspectors the full extent of the damage. The principal issues that ultimately caused the Great North Korean Famine started well before 1995, when the famine is widely believed to have started. These issues cut to the core of the identity of the North Korean regime. What happened as a result was suffering on a massive scale. In our next video in this series, we will discuss what happened during the famine and the factors that prolonged it. Thanks for watching.